Has communism really come to America? During the Cold War, much was written about Marxism in the United States by Americans who had been members of the Communist Party USA and by clergy within the Catholic Church. These writers documented that Marxism is always on the offensive and is flexible in its propaganda and its directives. Because it is always on the offensive, it looks to leverage stalemates. Korea is a clear example from the past for that. For later attacks, its flexibility is reflected in the ever-changing nature of the language it uses. However, set patterns of behavior make the deceptions detectable. One pattern that's been repeatedly used has been agitating for, quote, social reform, unquote. Strap in, because we've got an expert to explain the situation in America this week on the Rob Maness Show. Hey friends, you need to check out Mammoth Nation, America's conservative discount club. They're on a mission to get Trump reelected and keep liberal Democrats, aka socialists and communists, out of office. These guys really mean it, folks. I wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. Go to mammothnation.com. It's only $19 a year, and here's what you get. Great discounts on all sorts of products and services. You're automatically entered in the Mammoth Election Day sweepstakes. There's some great prizes, including a 65-inch Samsung TV. And you're going to love this. I sure do. I'm a lifetime member, and if you become a lifetime member today, you get a free Trump flag and some other cool items. Once again, that's mammothnation.com. Let's go. Join us now so we can win in November. The American system was built on the values laid down in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In 1762, while it was still a British colony, James Otis of Massachusetts emphasized the hypocrisy of slavery in a nation built on liberty and freedom. Forbidden by the king to abolish slavery, Thomas Jefferson took up the issue in his original version of the Declaration. However, 2 of the 13 self-proclaimed states refused to join in the rebellion if slavery were abolished. The issue was dropped because the strength of the rebellion relied upon unanimous consent. This true social reform took the Civil War and constitutional amendments to resolve. My guest today writes in his 5-part series, The Nature of Communism, at robmaness.com, that we need to understand 2 terms in order to follow what's happening with communism and Marxism in America, and they are progressivism and socialism. The start of progressivism in the United States is typically dated to around 1890, but this view hones in on a set of issues without defining what progressivism in the U.S. really is. What is labeled the progressive era was a reaction to what we've seen as a set of injustices, labor abuses, and lack of women's suffrage. When viewed this way, it should be apparent that organic U.S. progressivism is a desire to correct injustice. Since the cornerstone of a republic is justice, this desire should strengthen our republic, not weaken it. From this perspective, progressivism can be seen in the earliest days of this republic. The trick is that it needs to be a real injustice, not one that is contrived. From the beginning, Lenin's Aesopian language used progressive to strictly mean, quote, advancing socialism, unquote. However, socialism itself can describe many different economic and political systems. There are just a whole bunch of qualifiers that can be used that renders the general term difficult to pin down. Socialism in the United States actually predates Marx. Unlike atheistic Marxism, it was based on religious communities like the Shakers or the Amana colonies. This brand of socialism was more about pooling resources than anything approaching a dialectic process. Socialism to a Marxist is the period of time between the collapse of capitalism and the emergence of what Marxists call Bolshevik man. The difficult part is to understand the intended meaning behind the use of these terms. As Hayek writes, the original socialists, like those in the US, were horrified by the violence wrought by the National Socialists leading up to World War II. Louis F. Boudin's concludes in his book, The Techniques of Communism, by claiming that a belief in God is the best antidote for communism. This actually pinpoints a key to the decoder ring, according to our guest. That is, look at how the speaker or writer respects the Bill of Rights. If the thrust of the message is to restrict your speech, your right to assemble, the right to worship, and the right to defense, the speaker or writer is a Marxist. Suppressing individual rights is a goal of Marxism. It's not a goal of either progressivism or socialism, but it can be a byproduct. Another telltale sign is whether the scale of any social reform being agitated is equitable to the agitation being made. There's always room for enlightened discussion to improve the cohesion of society. We call that civil discourse. Violence and force will disrupt cohesion and are hallmarks of Marxism. My guest today is author of The Road to Americanism, Dennis Haw, a professor, computer scientist, and Air Force veteran who has studied communism and served in the Cold War to defeat the Russian version of it. My friend Dennis Haw, author, he calls himself, and he is a jack of all trades. I think he's been a guitarist in a rock band. I know he's a computer scientist and has worked on projects like Mars rovers, programming those systems, and is also a studier of and a person that understands our republic, and not only how it was built, but how it has survived over the century and a half nearly that it's has existed. And he's also studied opposing views, and he's written 5 articles for robmaness.com titled The Nature of Communism. I encourage you to go to robmaness.com and check those out, and that'll give you a lot more detailed information. But Dennis, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's always great to talk with you.
Well, it's great to see you. We're having a hurricane week again this week down here in southeast Louisiana, but all the systems are go today. So let's dive right in on this. You know, your series that you wrote, The Nature of Communism, was fascinating to me, partly because I experienced the Cold War as a young airman and an officer, and you were an Air Force officer too. So you fought the Cold War against Soviet Marxism and communism, and we defeated it. But also because of what's happening in our society today, as I observe it, I'm very, very concerned about what appears to be an attempt to foment a Marxist type revolution amongst some loosely organized groups that are pretty well funded and active across the United States. I think there have been about 520 or so documented violent riots associated with the Black Lives Matter or anti-fascist, Antifa groups across America since the end of May when they first started. So let's dive right into this, and what is actually happening from your perspective and your expertise with communism and Marxism on the ground in this situation here in the United States of America?
Okay, well, Rob, let me start by saying one of my foundational backgrounds, not just being a mathematician and a computer scientist, but when I was in the Air Force, I was actually an interrogator for the SERI program. And back in the Cold War, SERI spelled S-E-R-E, and nowadays I hear people pronounce it SEER, but we pronounce it SERI. And in those days, it stood for Survival, Escape, Resistance, and Evasion. And what happened is the E's are the emphasis. So it was escape and evasion. And that had to do first with our experiences in the Korean War. and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then the evasion part was secondary. And what they did is once the war wound up in the Middle East, we discovered that we needed to switch to ease. And the reason for that is that a Muslim terrorist was going to cut your head off, so you just didn't want to get caught. So anyway, but as such, I was schooled in the Cold War communism, as you say. But the thing is, I need to back us up where you said we defeated Soviet communism. That's what we thought. But the reality is we didn't. All that happened is we brought the Russian state down, and the dictatorship of the proletariat moved to Beijing from Moscow. And you can really see this clearly as a continuum if you look at the 2020 DoD report to Congress on the Chinese threat. It's right out of the Marxist playbook.
You nailed that point. Exactly what I've been thinking, and what I've read in your articles, Dennis, is that the Chinese Communist Party has subsumed and assumed that mantle, and is in an active, complete, and total unrestricted warfare situation, not just against the United States, but against the West.
Yes.
So, what are you seeing on the ground? You mentioned in your articles about how these patterns that the Marxists and communists use when they're trying to foment revolution and violence and those kind of things are detectable. Well, how are they detectable? And I know that there's been agitation for social reform. We can see that. That's part of what we're seeing with BLM and the Antifa situation, where they take a very minuscule piece of data, young black men unarmed being killed by police, which is such a small number you can't measure it here in the United States of America today, and they explode that and are able to get the population to support them and to get the monetary support to support them. So beyond that, are you seeing any other patterns? Because you mentioned in your article that they can be detected. What are they, if you're seeing any other ones?
Well, it's a really complicated situation because we don't have just Marxists that are on the march here. What we have, I hate to use the term useful idiots, but if you look at it, we have American progressivism that has kind of blended with socialism, and it's actually, well, I'm working on a third book, and I'll explain this in more detail. But what's going on the ground right now is BLM is clearly a Marxist organization. And one way you can tell that is they come right out and tell you that. And so what that means is you can go straight to my 2 parts on Aesopian language. And if you're paying attention, one of the things that BLM has on their website is they say that they want to disrupt the Western paternal family. Okay, that is classic Aesopian. We did a live meeting at a coffee shop a while back, and we had some left of center people there. We, it was all cordial and everything. We weren't at each other's throats. But then it came up about this particular item. And I said, well, they want to destroy the Western family. And they got all huffy about it. And the reality is the word disrupt. That's a classic double meaning. Okay. And to the actual Marxists that are in on BLM, they know that means destroy. Okay, and somebody like me who sees that, I automatically know they mean destroy. But then the problem is you get well-meaning people that don't understand it because it says disrupt, not destroy. They take it literally. There's a thing called motivated reasoning that kind of enables that. And so it's an ugly situation where we have people that don't know that they're supporting a Marxist organization.
Well, that's one piece. Yeah, I've been pointing people to the BLM website and to the Antifa handbook that
Mhm.
famously Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has a picture of holding up when he was, and he supports Antifa, which is really is a domestic terror organization. I believe
Well, that
both
brings
represent.
up another point, Rob. You mentioned Keith Ellison, and he and my friend Zudy Jasser have been at odds for a long time. And Zudy's the white hat guy. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, Keith Ellis, there's what Zudy calls the red-green axis that's come about, and what he's referring to is you can look at Bernie Sanders and the squad. It's clear that they're aligned. Um, uh, to add on to the sapient thing, though, another way to differentiate it, other than they just tell you, is, as I point out in the article, look at what their motivation is. If they're respecting inalienable rights like the Bill of Rights, then you may be dealing with somebody who's not a Marxist. But if they're actually angling to take away your rights, you are talking about a Marxist. Okay. And so, by that reasoning, if you look at it, Beto O'Rourke is a Marxist.
Yeah, he's the presidential candidate on the Democrat
Yeah.
primary side that famously said, "Yes, I'm going to take away your AR-15s." Isn't
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, and it's pretty clear to those of us that have been, opposing communism and Marxism for such a long time that that really all aspects of this, I call it an insurrection, quite frankly,
Well, it
want
is.
not though just take away your rights, but destroy your rights forever by destroying the history of the United States of America and replacing it with this this political science. Uh, 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 what it's a set of writings called the 1619 Project that completely denies and tries to destroy that the United States was founded on those values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and says that no, it really was 400 years ago, and it's all been created to preserve slavery, which is complete baloney. And every major historian that's written on the subject, I think there's 5 or 6 of them, have spoken out on it that are willing to, and have written tons of articles on this. And that is one of the things that you see is that folks that push that kind of doctrine like 1619 Project insist that you acknowledge its truth, and they
Hmm.
insist that you not be able to say something like all lives matter. That's what I say. I served in the military for 33 plus years, risked my
Yeah.
life, had people die under my command, and risked other Americans' lives with my decision making and everything. And we didn't serve because of somebody's skin color. All lives matter, including baby lives that are in the womb. Every human life matters to us. And but they don't want you to be able to say that. They don't want you to be able to be out in public peacefully if you have a certain skin color, according to what we've seen going around in some of the major cities with folks in restaurants being not just disrupted but accosted, theft of their food. One guy even drank a person's beer after he ran him off out of the
Yeah.
restaurant. So your right to peacefully assemble, they don't want you to have that. They don't want you to be able to freely speak about your opposition to their violence. It certainly looks a lot like Marxism to me. Your thoughts?
It is. It's a really complicated set of organizations right now that are causing all the trouble. I mean, certainly we have the pure Marxist strain. It's kind of interesting because I mentioned the red-green axis. There's, I'm wanting to suggest that it actually needs to be red-green square because there are actually two greens. There's the Islamic green, but then there's the greenies, the Green New Deal. Because if you look at the organizations, and I don't know how many there are, I mean, everybody talks about BLM and Antifa. And occasionally you hear about the Sunrise Movement. Okay.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of local groups, especially in Seattle area. But if you look at the Sunrise Group, that's a greenie organization. And what they're doing, you have 20 something mothers that are actually taking their kids and putting them in the front line for shields.
Yeah.
And they, they, this is actually recorded on Zoom. And what you've got there is and Michael Schellenberger, thank goodness that he's come out and written Apocalypse Never, because these people have scared the hell out of people, especially kids. And these people are convinced. And so now you've got the communists who are convinced, the Marxist theory is true. You have Muslims who just want to kill Christianity and take over the country for their faith, and those two will eventually fight each other. But then you got this third group, which are concerned that the world's going to incinerate in 10 years, which is just plain nuts. And I had actually written a chapter for The Road to Americanism that I ended up pulling out because I felt it didn't fit, but it's going to be in this new book. And what I did is I gathered all the information I could find about climate change and assembled that and put it together. And in doing that, I realized, heck, the only evidence they have for their arguments about the world incinerating are due to computer modeling. Well, I did computer modeling for a living for 5 years at Digital Equipment Corporation. And we podcasted Randy Larson, who wrote Our Own Worst Enemy, New York Times bestseller in 2007. He's like a recognized expert in bioterrorism. Anyway, in talking with him, he asked me to write an article that was posted subsequently out on his page. I don't remember. Did you pick up that article on computer modeling and post it on your site?
I don't think I have yet, but I'll certainly do that.
Okay, I'll dig it out for you. He asked me to write a 12 to 1300 word article that, as he put it, would explain computer modeling to somebody who didn't do math in public, which I thought was really great request because I think that's very called for. And the truth of the fact is that any time that you use computer modeling there's interpolation and there's extrapolation. And extrapolation is basically forecasting. And so like right now, you are living the problem with extrapolation and computer modeling. That hurricane's sitting there. Now, did they project that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good
Okay,
question.
that's
No, they
that's
didn't
the
project
problem.
that.
You see what happens if you look at it, you have a slope going on. It's about on this trajectory, and the model will assume it's going to go that way. Well, you might wind up with the slope taken off like this or like this, and it could happen immediately. It could do that an infinite number of times over the space that you're looking. And another thing, as far as this climate change stuff goes, I worked on a project called GOZAR when I worked for Lockheed Martin. And what the GOES satellite family does is they actually are satellites that are sniffing the atmosphere. More of the upper atmosphere, not the troposphere, which is where we live. Well, there's a whole lot to be said on this. I mean, the Russians actually have the best mathematical models, in particular on the sun. And the nut theory of this whole thing really centers around a simple equation, which really becomes complicated. And they talk about tuning, called radiative forcing. And it's as simple as, well, you get more heat coming in than escapes from the atmosphere. And that's based upon the CO2 greenhouse gas theory, which nobody's ever proven that CO2 leads to heating. It was a conjecture from 1876, and people are running with it and embracing it, but it hasn't been proven that heat doesn't precede CO2 from the
Yeah, and didn't
record.
the lefties
Uh,
Dennis, didn't the lefties change their terminology to climate change from global warming because these models that were supposedly highly accurate were debunked in so many different ways? I mean, they weren't total lies, but the projections they were making were debunked quite a bit, weren't they?
well, if let's look at COVID. Okay, Neil
Mm,
Ferguson's projection. I mean, that was clearly a case of bad software engineering to
yeah,
begin with. But even good software engineering can't accurately project the epidemiology that's going to take place.
yeah,
Um, right. And epidemiology is a lot simpler than projecting what's going to happen in the atmosphere.
sure is. I've
So
never
I'm not
changed a
saying
plan based on a weather forecast.
exactly. I mean, I'd like to say, yeah, the climate will change. It's called weather, which people
Yeah,
get riled up about. But all climate is basically considering a wider snapshot of what weather is, and on a more global scale, if you will. Um, but the thing is, I'm not saying that there isn't anything to be concerned about, but what I am
yeah.
saying is to absolutely throw away your life on account of some mythical thing. It's called catastrophizing,
Yeah.
and it's something that all of us have innately, where we want to think the absolute worst thing is going to happen.
Well,
And the truth,
an idea is bad when you have to use totalitarianism like Marxism and communism to try to
yeah,
force your green environment and Green New Deal on a population like they're trying to force their Green New Deal onto the American people, don't you? I mean, that's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the ultimate test of an idea, whether it's good or bad, right?
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is that we've got three forms of totalitarianism that are now kind of working together, and unfortunately, our institutions are funding it. So that's what's perpetuating it. If we want to stop the cycle, we need to get our institutions to cut the money off now.
Yeah, like the president recently terminated all critical race theory based indoctrination training for every government agency, and I have documentation even showing it's being used in the United States Air Force after the riots started this year, which is unfortunate. And I'm glad the president took that step because that's one of the things that's being funded, and critical race theory needs to be thoroughly debunked for the Marxist propaganda an attack on civil rights that it really is. Uh, what are the other what are the other patterns that the greenies a lot of the wildfires that have come up in the last few weeks out west, especially the Pacific Northwest, I think they've arrested 9 or 10 people now for
Yeah,
setting these fires. Two of them have been confirmed by themselves to be members of Antifa and BLM protesters. And the mainstream media is trying to say that that's not happening, just like Antifa is a myth, according to the leftists, folks like Jerry Nadler in Congress. But we all know better. So, what are the other
yeah.
things we're seeing? The fire setting's one of those things, I think. What are the other patterns that we're seeing emerge from this group?
Uh, well, uh, of course, the planning's a lot more thorough than we would think it is.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if these individual groups are capable of doing that coordinated of planning. I don't believe they are. So that tells me there's an umbrella group that is actually guiding this whole thing. And the old statement, follow the money.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's clear that the Ford Foundation and George Soros are the two biggest contributors to BLM. That doesn't extrapolate to funding Antifa, BLM, Sunrise, um, even the local groups. I think there are two in Portland that are associated with BLM, but they are separate.
Hmm.
Excuse me. Um, I'm not an investigator, and I don't have boots in the ground. So I don't know the answer, but that is clearly something that we need to get to the bottom of. Excuse me a sec.
Well, yeah, we're one of the things that I'm seeing from independent journalists that are on the ground is that they're using these crowdfunding sites, they being Antifa and BLM and their supporters, to bring in large sums of money. It looks like they're laundering it to me. It certainly smells like it. I hope the federal government, Department of Justice, is going to take a look at these activities through the RICO Act, because
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing the numbers, we're seeing the funding come in, but we need investigative and subpoena and warrant power in order to really dig into that. And the only folks that can do that is the federal and state departments of justice. So hopefully that is happening as part of the investigations of these. But how about the Chinese Communist Party, Dennis? I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
indicators that lead me to believe that the Chinese Communist Party is not only infiltrated into the United States, especially through the academia system, where professors have
Yep.
been arrested and charged with hiding funding from the Chinese Communist Party, where the Confucius Institutes, which are now banned, but were on college campuses and even high school campuses, from what we've seen. And all of those are propaganda arms of the Chinese Communist Party. Is there any indication that you've seen that funding is coming through? I suspect it is, but I haven't seen the facts on it yet from a detailed perspective.
I can't personally find the traces. I don't know who can, but I tried to find the money trail to the media. It's clear that the owners of the media have ties, but you can't find out the trail on that. Um, it's a very interesting question, because, quite honestly, the Chinese are more capable than any of concocting what I see here as a master plan. And,
Hmm.
and I'm not trying to say, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is just, I see a master plan here that looks pretty militaristic to me, doesn't it to you?
It certainly does. And I know that the People's Liberation Army is embedded in every Chinese company. The
Yep.
reason the president wants to ban TikTok is because TikTok takes millions of Americans' data and gives it to the PLA and
Yeah.
other companies that are Chinese companies. And I was pleased to see that the United States is starting to put pressure on the stock exchange folks and those kind of things to make these Chinese companies have to follow U.S. Reporting laws, which they don't currently have to do because our politicians have given them a break in the hopes that they would be westernized. Which what's really happened is we've created an extremely powerful, economically powerful communist Chinese party and state in China that's becoming a peer competitor very rapidly, aren't they?
I got to interject something here. My favorite line in all of rock and roll comes from an old Rolling Stones song called 19th Nervous Breakdown. And it fundamentally just says, instead of rearranging your mind, you were disarranging mine. And that's exactly what's happened with our relationship with China. And I need to interject one other thing. You hear a lot about stops stealing our intellectual property. Well, what's wrong with that statement? And I know initially the Trump administration thought they were going to be able to get China to agree with that.
Hmm.
China will never agree to that. They can't. Their whole system is based upon denying that personal property is valid.
That's right.
So, and if you look at the way the statements were, it looks like, okay, the people on the Chinese side were willing to go along with the wording as long as the word didn't get out to the Chinese people. The minute it looked like that word was going to get out to the Chinese people, it got shut down in a hurry.
Yeah.
So, and now that should not make us believe that they had any intention of respecting our intellectual property. That
Mhm.
wasn't going to happen. And I say that from working with the Chinese for over a year and having been over there. And it took me a year to understand I needed to leave the company I was working for because they're communists and they don't believe
Yeah.
in personal property.
That's right. They don't believe in private property at all. And so we have all these things happening. We suspect there are some centralized planning going on. We don't know yet who or what collective of entities that is. But we see the results of it, which leads us back to that. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just you and I are just two old military guys that do
Right.
analysis and stuff like that.
I,
Uh,
I will say
but
this, I don't think it comes from George Soros.
no, I don't
Um,
think it. I think the funding, a lot of the funding does, and I'm not
yes.
sure what
Yeah.
of that funding is not coming from the Chinese Communist Party. I suspect there's quite large amounts of funding coming somewhere from the Chinese Communist Party, which is our money being funneled back at us to attack us and destroy the United States as we know it anyway. So,
That's
so
exactly right.
but these kinds of revolutions have been nipped in the bud before in world history, haven't they? And what are your thoughts on what the ordinary American can do to try to stem this tide and prevent the complete takeover?
Well, the private American, I don't know. You see, the conundrum we got is the fuel is coming from the corporations. And an individual American who's dependent upon their livelihood with those corporations is kind of stuck. There's not much they can do because uh, they're stuck with the top-down dictate. And those corporations are actually acting like communist states right now. Uh, they've got all these speech codes, and you get fired if you say anything against BLM or
Hmm.
some of this other stuff. Um, I mean, they basically are enforcing the repeal of the Bill of Rights. Um, and I guess one thing you could do is quit the corporation you're working for and start your own company. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah.
The problem is that there isn't a whole lot of protection for a small company, in particular, like in my field, in the computer business. One thing I always liked the fact that we didn't unionize, but the problem is we didn't unionize, and so
Hmm.
that's why most computer jobs went offshore, and they still are offshore.
Yeah.
I don't know how I get an income, to tell you the truth.
Well, I'm glad you get one. Well, I guess one of the things that we could do though is write it. We could encourage folks to call their congressman and lay out your concerns and ask them to take some action. I mean, Congress has, in large part, bears some responsibility uh, on being lenient on the Chinese corporations and those kinds of things. So we could call on those folks and also call on those folks to really take a hard look at these big, especially the big tech corporations, which, as you mentioned, are using speech codes which violate people's civil rights. And that gets me to the executive branch. The Department of Justice has a civil rights division. Our government at the federal level and the state level governments need to get beyond the definition of civil rights only being about the right to vote by people of color or Black Americans or African Americans, whatever you want to call that community, and really have an enforcement from the perspective of individual civil rights. Because if I can't say certain things without fear of losing my job, that's a violation really of my civil rights in this country. And it shouldn't be allowed to continue when we have a federal government that's paid to make sure that folks are following the law and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. The last time I checked, are the law.
Well, no, there's a difference between civil right and inalienable rights. And the Constitution only guarantees that the national government isn't going to get in the way of our inalienable rights. And by extrapolation of the supremacy clause, the state governments won't, all the way down to even your HOA can't take away your inalienable rights, the Bill of Rights. On the other hand, the government can't force an institution, in theory. Now, because of what we've been through in our history, we've put in place the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as well as other years. And as I talk about in Political Vertigo, I consider them improper laws, is what I call them.
Yeah.
And I don't, and the reason is they exceed their constitutional authority. And I think that's okay as long as you sunset it. But what we've done is we haven't sunsetted those. As a matter of fact, we've tightened the screws and we've instituted a quota system that is actually antithetical to liberty. So if you want to look at things from a constitutional perspective, that's where this all stands. And so I would say that when it comes to these institutions, the government really shouldn't. Now, I'm not saying that it can't and that it would be wrong in the larger picture of things, but the government really should be careful on what it dictates institutions to do.
That's
I
true.
think.
That's true. But what I'm saying is that,
Mhm.
to use a leftist term that I've heard a lot the last few weeks, is civil rights needs to be reimagined
Oh,
and go beyond just what the Civil Rights Act defined. Because as you're right, that act really is extra
yeah,
constitutional, and
yeah,
it enables the government to actually infringe on your inalienable rights. Quite honestly, in my opinion. So we need
it's the
to
camel's nose
reimagine.
on tent.
Yeah, we need to reimagine civil rights, but there's got to be, the government's function is to protect liberty. And if I'm not at liberty
Yes.
to be able to say what I think, you know, without compromising safety, like, the shouting the word fire in a crowded theater, those kinds of things, but to just simply be able to say, look, I don't think the BLM thing is right. It's not based on facts, that
Hmm.
are strong enough to go with this crowd that wants to destroy the country and everything. And I should be able to say that without fear of losing my job or fear that somebody's going to attack me physically or attack my family or burn my house down and those kinds of things. And my rights are being violated, quite
Hmm.
frankly, by these entities that are not government. So we've got
Well,
to reimagine. We've got to reimagine protecting people's liberty, and one of government's primary functions, isn't it, to protect liberty in America?
but on that, they're disturbance of the peace, disturbing police laws on the books
Mhm.
that can be enforced. And I think, and clearly, you're not seeing those being enforced in Portland, Seattle, LA, a lot of these cities.
Well, no, the
Um,
police aren't even showing up if you call them.
well, it's not the police's fault, right?
Well, it's
It's the
either lack of resources
government.
or their government elected officials are stopping them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and those. That's a case where people just don't realize how disconnected their government is from their best interests, and they're not holding them to account.
Yeah.
Um, in a perfect world, I would say, well, they want to live that way. That's their business. But clearly, it's being done with political motives behind it.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know what the answer is, Rob. But I would just say we should first try to figure out how we encourage institutions to do the right thing. And the core problem is the C-level executives in all these corporations fancy themselves as citizens of the world. To cut to the chase, they're not patriots like you and I are. They have a
Yeah.
whole different twisted view of the world. Um, and to be honest with you, that that global view is very much in tune with Marxism.
Yeah, and I think a large
Because
portion of the American population under the age of 35 is caught up into that idea as
yep,
citizens of the world and not
yeah,
citizens of the United States of America.
yeah,
And I think you're seeing that playing out in
yeah.
our politics with this current presidential election and congressional elections that are coming up. The country has a choice. Are we a country? And do we keep our strength and the good in the world that the United States has been the only country to be able to do, or do we go down this path that the perpetrators of violence and Marxism and socialism are trying to drag the American people down, and a lot of people are willing to go with them.
All right. And the problem is that we've got people that lack a full understanding of the monster they're creating. So you've got like most of these C-level executives, and I've worked with them elbow to elbow, they're greed heads, just like what they're accusing, Wall Street of. They're all greed heads. And
Hmm.
the main greed factor that they've been in the tech world anyway, for the last 20 something years has been send it offshore for cheap labor. And in particular, the one thing they keep looking at is the almost 2 billion people in China, and they go, wow, what a market. Um,
Yeah.
but the stupid thing is, they don't realize there's no wealth there. There's no wealth there because it's a communist state, and
Hmm.
communist states don't create wealth, they destroy it.
Yeah.
And the only wealth that's in China is the wealth that we've exported. So, like when I go home to my area in Ohio, which by the way is Jim Jordan's district, I see hollowed out towns that used to thrive when I was a kid.
Hmm.
And I've been to Shanghai. And what I see is the wealth that's been exported from those places actually put into China. And these fools really believe that they're going to get all this money coming back at them. And the reality is that the Chinese CCP, through their institutions that they control, they do funnel the money back because that's their game.
Hmm.
Uh, are the Chinese people prospering from what's going on? Well, to a degree. They are a lot better off than they were under Mao.
Yeah.
And if you look at the 2020 DoD report, they even explicitly say that Xi Jinping's regime is very mindful that they don't want to repeat the haste of the Mao era and that they want to go slowly.
Yeah.
So it's all a shell game. And a, a lot of this gets hidden behind devaluation. And flat out, it's the devaluation of the dollar and the peg game that the Chinese play.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like from an ordinary American's perspective, the best thing we can do is go vote and make sure we vote all the way down the ballot. Because, folks, as Dennis and I have been discussing, the place where politicians are making decisions that you're not going to get police support and they're not going to enforce laws that we have on the books to protect our civil rights is at the local level and the state level, and you need to vote accordingly. Isn't that right, Dennis?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I mean, we're so focused on the national level, and that's actually another Marxist thing because what they're doing is they're encouraging centralization. And
Hmm.
so our focus is centralized. One of the most frustrating things for me is I try to figure out which judges that I want to vote for or against in the local
Hmm.
area.
Yeah,
Um, Good luck with that. It's hard. And
it is.
you can't go by the blue book that Barr puts out. That's the most corrupt organization there is. Um, from my research, the only judges that I want to vote for are the ones that they say don't vote for these people. And the reason is they're not singing out of the progressive handbook. They're actually wanting to do real law.
Yeah, and there are attorneys that become judges and prosecutors and defense lawyers that actually don't buy into the leftism that a large portion of that population tends to do. That you can vote for, and they tend to be community oriented and leadership oriented. So they are out there. You just have to find them and then go vote for them. And especially at the
Yeah.
county council level, show up at your council meetings. The mayors will be there at city council meetings, so they're all there, and they're the folks that are making these decisions, like defund the police, which is another Marxist goal from Black Lives Matter, and you can stop them. It's all within our power to stop this if we do our duty and go vote and hold our elected officials accountable at the place where they're closest to us more than anywhere else. And that it's at the city, local, and state level. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, but I'd add, don't just go vote. Do some research first, because
Yeah.
these answers aren't easy. And you definitely want to go talk to the people, because there's nothing that will tell you more about somebody than talking to them personally.
Absolutely right. I've talked to hundreds of thousands of people personally myself in politics, and there's nothing better than giving your message and answering questions from folks that are and should be skeptical of anybody that runs for office. Well, Dennis, how can folks find you so they can come and support your work as an author and get in touch with you to ask you questions?
Maness.com. No, actually, I have a domain name that's pretty easy to remember. It's called libertyreads.com.
Well, there you have it, folks. libertyreads.com with this man who has expertise across a broad spectrum of knowledge and intellectual capacity, and especially on our American Republic. Thanks very much for joining us today, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Rob, and stay safe.
Mammoth Nation is the discount club for conservatives. You get great discounts on name brand products and services, and the proceeds help candidates who support the right causes. Plus, the money you save from just one purchase can pay for your entire membership. Liberal Democrats are destroying America, and we can't let Joe Biden be president. It's time to join the fight. Strength in numbers. We give the silent majority a resounding voice. Go to mammothnation.com and let's win this fight together.
I'd like to thank Mr. Hoff for joining us today, and I hope that his experienced words help all of my friends and supporters and viewers and anybody else that comes across this episode of the Rob Maness Show to understand what's really happening on the ground today, and that it is about Marxism and communism in the future of this country, and it is opposed to the democratic republic that most Americans still hold dear. Until next week, I'll see you on the Rob Maness Show.